Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about an API, what it is, what it does. We're going to talk about the math class. We're going to talk about wrappers. I'm going to use a program called The Lottery for an example, which might be very beneficial for you for this week. Strings, we're going to call substrings, index of, and last index of. Okay? And then we'll talk about the printf method. Normally, when you're working on a program and you use an API library, there are going to be pre-built classes that say how a certain function works. Okay? That's what an API is. This way you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. Everyone uses the same, like, for example, pi. What's pi? Is that ever going to change?
Depending on how far they go out the decimal point.
Well, let's just say you're going out 2 decimal points.
No, it's not.
3.14, right? Everyone knows pi is 3.14. Why are you going to reinvent the wheel? All you have to do is call the math library, right? Everyone with me? So all the mathematical functions are in the math library. Now, the cool thing about it is math library is a subset of the language library. So if you just import the language library, you have math included. Hint, hint, hint. Okay? Or if it's going to be a very complicated task such as the scanner class. Y'all have imported the scanner class a couple times now, right? Instead of having to write all that code, you just imported the library or linked it to it. How many of y'all have done a include file on an HTML page? You're including a file from a different source. That's what a library file is. You're just including that file into the source code. It's read, and you don't ever see the code. Does that make sense? The APIs for, which are known as the Application Programming Interface, hint, hint, hint. The API library is at docs.oracle.com/java.se/7/docs/API. This is going to give you all the import libraries that you could possibly want to import for any program that you possibly could come up with. Okay? For example, if I import the java.util.scanner, I'm importing the scanner function of the util library. All right? So I could just say import java.util, and everything in the utility library will then be available to me. Does that make sense?
That'll be quite burdensome.
Yes, it will. But you could do it. Okay? Remember, scanner is what we call a package. Package is underneath directory of the utility or a group of the utility class. Does that make sense? You have your class, and you have your package, then you have your source code, right? Y'all have seen that when we hit the trees on NetBeans. You start out with your class, except you have a package, then a class, then source code. Same thing. The utility class is the only one you need to know for the scanner. That's really all you need to know right now. The further we get along, the more you're going to be importing stuff, all right? For example, the java.language package. All right? Now I could do java.lang.math to import math, or I could just simply do import.java.lang.star, which is anything below the java.lang. Does that make sense? So is it going to be beneficial to have the math class underneath here? Or should I just say import java.lang.math? Yes?
What's the difference between lang and util?
They're two different classes.
Okay, because you don't have to use the dot asterisk though for the util scanner.
If you wanted to use everything that's in the utility, or be able to import everything, like Lee said, it'd be very burdensome because you're talking, I don't know, hundreds of classes that you're importing, or hundreds of packages you're importing. And the same thing with language. Hundreds of things that you're importing. You really, when you're writing the code, you only want to import what you need. But for simplification purposes, you could do this if you don't know that you're going to need, what packages you're going to need. Does that make sense? For a beginner, this may be a little easier than for someone that's been like Lee, who's been around programming for 20 years that knows exactly what class or package he's going to use for a specific function. And that's why if you go back to here, you can actually find what the import class you need to import for a specific function. So if I'm doing the absolute path or the absolute value of something, what class am I going, or what package am I going to import? Anyone know? What? Probably math. Well, let's take a look. Here are all my different packages. Under util, I have util concurrent.atomic, current.locks, jar, logging, prefs, SPI, zips. As you can see, there's a lot of different things in here, right? So if I come over here and I just click on language, well, where is it? Java.lang. It's going to tell me which ones I can come up underneath. .lang.math, right? So all I'm going to do is import in for math. It gives me my static doubles. Here's my absolute value. So I need to do math, right? Is there any questions? I mean, that's how you can come through. You can look at all classes and come down here and say, I need to find I want to do a basic list UI. Well, here's the package that I would have to install. But all I have to do is import java.lang.object, and I'll get everything underneath this. Does that make sense? Y'all understand where it's coming from? Okay. An API header. Okay. You really don't need to know what's all inside of it to be able to interface with it. You just need to know that that particular function is going to be inside that method or that class. All right. For example, to perform an input, you need to know how to use the scanner class methods. Next, next line, next in, next double, right? But you don't care where it's actually located underneath the java.lang or the java.util.scanner, do you? You just need to know what type of arguments you need to have and how you're going to pass it and what values it can return. That's really all you need to know is about the functionality of that specific code segment that you're using. For example, public, integer, next integer, right? Well, all methods in the API library are what we call public methods. That means they're defined, they're set, it can be accessible from anyone, anywhere. The difference between public and private. Private means only those that have it or know about it can access it. Does that make sense? Between public and private? Int. All this is saying that it's going to return an integer type from whatever this argument is going to, that you pass it. That's all it's saying. So integer days, standard integer, or standard input of next integer. Pretty simple, right? That's all you're doing. Basic math class, public static int absolute value of integer num. What is it going to return? The absolute value of the integer num. What about double absolute double num? Still the same thing. It's taking this and it's going to return it back in this cast. Remember we talked about typecasting? This is going to identify what this absolute double variable is going to be. This could also be an integer num, absolute integer num, and you can return it and put it back into a double if you wanted to. Does that make sense? But you can't have a double here and have an integer here. It'll give you compile error. What about integer of max? You've got x and y. What is it going to return? X and y. Again, is going to return the larger of x and y. Right? Why? Why is it returning only 1? Because you only identify that you're wanting 1. Does that make sense? All right, let's talk a little bit more. What about min of x and y? The smaller value. Why? You're looking for the minimum. What about pow? Right, it's going to return in a double format the double of num to the double power. After you hit, if you put 2 and 2, so it would be 2 to the 2, which would be what? 4. Okay? Double random. It's going to give you a value between 0.0 and 1.0. Unless you specify a specific range. What about long round double number? Because it's a long, and you take your rounding, it's going to go to the next one, higher or lower, to the next closest num. Okay, the whole number. The square root of a number. Obviously, is going to return the square root, right? Y'all catching these? If you're going to talk about a specific mathematical calculation, you know, like we did the is equal or equals, is lower, is upper, right? Math is the same way. You're going to call that method to math.abs for absolute of position 1 minus position 2. So whatever you take the formula here, whatever position 1, position 2, so you have a negative 3, what's the absolute value of that? Well, the absolute value of a negative is a positive, so your answer would be 3, right? What if we have this? Length is approximately 1.4 times the area to the 0.6. Simple. Integer area that we've already said that our integer is going to be, our area we want to be 10,000. So double, the river length is going to be 1.4 times 10, right? Times the 10,000. However, since it's a powered, you got to do the math power function. So 10,000 times 0.6, or 2.6, will give you a number, and then you multiply that by 1.4, and it will actually give you your answer, whatever it is. Everyone with me? Have I lost you? Not yet. Okay. The math contains a constant named pi. Pi is written as that funky little symbol, right? The pi symbol. And it's all it is the ratio of the circle's diameter, perimeter to its diameter, which is 3.1415926, and so forth, so on, right? All you really need to know is 3.14. It's a constant. Its value is fixed because pi has that set value, right? It's a never-ending number, but it's still set. If you attempt to assign a value to pi, you will get an error. Y'all remember was it last chapter before, when we can do final double and set it to something? And if you attempt to reset it later on, what happens? You get an error. Same thing. This is a final double with a value of 3.14. You can't change it. Okay? Our wrapper classes. Basically, they give the functionality to that particular method or that item. The wrapper classes, int, long, float, double character. That's what the class name is. The primitive type is int, long, float, double character. Right? Wrong. It's integer. Just see if you're paying attention. Wrapper classes names are the same as the primitive except for the uppercase first letter. That's the only difference. The wrapper classes are also defined in java.language. And so there's no need to import a wrapper class explicitly. Okay, just import java.language. Um, um, okay, if I'm going to take a string to a number, integer dot parse int, and whatever the string is, it'll give me a number. If I want to take a number to a string, integer to string, and give it a number, and it'll give you whatever the string value is. Yes.
So what's the parsing?
Well,
Is that specific or is it?
parse, it just means read it and give me a number. You're parsing the data to get what the information you need. If it's an integer, it'll give you the integer value. If it's a long, it'll give you long, float, float, double, double. All right. For example, the integer year is going to be integer parse int year string. So if I have 2011 is a string, right? I'm parsing it to be going to be 2011. That'll be my integer. Score. The score is a 78.5. You notice it's a string. I'm just changing it back to 78.5 as a score. So this is what it would do. Does that make sense? And if I wanted to change it back, all it does is put quotes around it. Okay? What's the difference between max and min? One gives you the maximum value in that range, and one gives you the minimum value in that range. Alright? Let's talk about a lottery program that prompts the user to guess a randomly generated number between 0 and a maximum integer value. The user pays $1 for each guess and wins $1 million if the guess is correct. The user can enter a queue to quit. So what would you do? Want to win $1 million? If so, guess the lucky number. The number between 1 and whatever we set is our max value. Okay? Do insert a dollar and enter your number, or queue to quit, and you'll read it in. Of course, the winning number has to be randomly chosen, so you would do what function? Random. But you have to give it a range. Okay? So if input equals give me a hint, that would be a backdoor. Try that number. A little cheater, right? Else, if it's not input equals Q, then if you and it's missing the if statement. It should be if it equals winning number. And if not, then it's not quite right. And then it'll ask them to input Q. And then thanks for playing, come again. Gotta love looking at slides for the first time and realizing there are errors in them. In chapter 3, we talked about the character at the length and the equals ignore case, right? Actually, we talked about those in chapter 4. Those methods are defined in our string class. And they're also in the Java.language, which is always important anyway. Here are the API headers, brief descriptions for two different alternative types of substrings. You can have public string substring and then integer begin index. All it's going to do is return a subset of the calling object string, which is substring, starting at the beginning X position and extending to the end of that called string. All right? And then if we add int after index, it'll go to the next to last. That's the difference between the two. Okay? Our calling object in this case is going to be Yoda, substring of 8. May the force be with you. So what's going to happen with the first print line here? I'm looking, what am I going to print? What do y'all think?
May the space.
Space.
May the with the space. What about Yoda substring 413?
May, followed by a space, another space, be with you, period.
Space, right after May, all the way to the force. The force.
Anyone else want to take a guess? Here's some other APIs with index of.
Y'all gonna tell us the answer?
One of you got it. I'm not going to tell you which one.
Not here.
The E is not printed.
Oh, because it is the 13 characters, so, okay. Alright.
Public int index of integer character. What does it do? All it does is just tell you if you have something, what the index value of that first character is. That's all it does. So if I'm looking for 8 from 3, what would it be? I'm looking at the 11th character, right? What if I'm looking for a string of str? If it's not found, this one might be handy.
Austin should have been here for this section.
Public int index of string str. It's looking, returns the position of the first occurrence given the str string within the calling object. So in this program that you're talking about, which is you have to look for and or end. So you're going to call this first one and. I mean, you're going to have a string called and. String and, except you can't type out. You may do and str, and it'll look for and to see if there's the first occurrence. If there's not, a -1 will be turned, and then you can say that the password's invalid, right? Wrong. Password be valid because it's not supposed to carry an and or a end. Public int index of string, and then the string starting at a certain point. Okay? So, I will not leave the square over my dead body. So if I'm looking at the index, the Egyptian index of a period, alright? String 2 is Egyptian substring of index plus 2. So what am I going to print? Let's go through this. If I will not leave the square period over my dead body, the index is going to equal the Egyptian index of a period. So I'm looking in here, finding that first instance of it starts right here, right? So Egyptian 2 is going to start 2 characters later. So it'll start at the O. What am I printing? Over my dead body. Because remember, we're printing a string of Egyptian 2. You're assigning the value of over my dead body to Egyptian 2, and you're just printing it out.
How are you doing that with +2?
The
Start
index
the
value,
index.
right, the substring of Egyptian index. So
Right.
here's my index, right? The index of this one was at this period, whatever that value is. We'll just say 20, just for a number, okay?
Okay, right.
So I'm storing 20 as my index value. So if I'm looking at Egyptian substring at period 20 and I'm adding 2 to 20, now I'm looking for spot 22. And I'm assigning, starting at spot 22, the rest of that string to Egyptian 2. And then I'm printing out Egyptian 2. Does everyone understand that?
Yeah.
I see some glazed looks. If you don't, honestly, raise your hand, let me know. Denny, you got it?
Yeah.
Chad, Brandon? Y'all getting it? Matthew?
That's how it always looks, so I understand it.
You always look dumbfounded and glassed over? Okay. All right. Now let's look at this code fragment here. We're going to look at the last index of. Okay. It's identical to the index of method, except that they search for the college object from right to left. Instead of going index of, then we do last index of and go backwards. It's a reversed array. Okay? So peace cannot be kept by force, semicolon, it can only be achieved by understanding. So, quote index of can plus space plus can 7 plus the last index of can. So, index of can, where am I at? I'm right here, right? So, what is that? 7? Spot 7, right? So I'm going to cannot be kept by force, it can only be achieved by understanding. Then I'm going to go to 7 more after that. Again, looking for can. The next version of can would be here, so 7 more would be where. And last index of, I'm coming back to look from can, it's here, now we're going back. This confuses everyone. If you're confused, raise your hand. Okay. I'm quote dot index of can. Where's my first can?
7.
Starts right here, right? So I'm going to print it out. I'm getting the value of it. So 7 space, and then my next one. From here, since I've already finished through this can, where's my next can? This is my next can, right? And so we're going to go up here, and we're adding 7 to it, right? So what am I printing?
B.
Do what?
B achieved by understanding, period.
Well, whatever the character value would be, that index spot. We're not printing out the statement, we're just looking for the index of.
B.
Whatever that character number is. Then, last index of, we come back. Well, here's can, so I'm whatever space that's at. Does that make sense? So we print this space, and then print that space. And if you want to try it out, you can always put that in a program just to fiddle around with it, all right? System out printf. All it does is allow you to do a formatted output statement. Okay? That allows you to get these in columns in the right column spaces. Does that make sense? That's really all printf does. So if I'm looking for a decimal space for a dollar sign, let's say I'm looking for a bank account, your total remaining is going to be in dollar sign and then %.2f tab in. All I'm saying is I'm going to have this dollar, whatever the value is going to be assigned to 2 decimal spots with a new line. Remaining 1 plus remaining 2. That's all it's saying. Does that make sense? Because you're actually putting all these together. You're going to have your dollar sign because it's in quotes. Your percent just says, hey, I'm looking for a formatting here. Dot 2F means I'm looking to the second decimal floating point. Did you catch that? Then the slash, my escape character N, prints new line. So your total remaining is going to come out to be whatever it is, and then it goes to the next line. Okay, here's the syntax of a format specifier. You're going to have your parenthesis, your percent. You're going to give a flag. Then you can give a width, and then you're going to give its precision. Okay, and then you can give its conversion character, whether it's a float or a double, a long, whatever it may be. So let's go back. I have this. What's my width? All it does, the width, it tells me how many characters are going to be displayed. In this case, 2 decimal places. Okay. What's my precision? 2 decimal places.
Yeah.
What's my conversion character? Float.
You didn't define a width in that.
Right. It would be whatever. I could put 10.2. So it'd give me 10 zeros up front. So that, like in this case, it would be 4.2F. Does that make sense? And instead of a slash N, it'd be a slash T. Okay? If you want to display a string, it's going to be an S. If you want a decimal integer, which would be a long or a float, it would be a D. I'm sorry, integer or long, it'll be a D. If you want a floating point, which is either a float or a double, it's going to be an F. And E means it's going to display a floating point number in scientific notation with the exponentials. So if I had said dot 2E, with that, what is that going to be? It'd take your value of the 1.1 and whatever the rest of it is in exponential. What, times 10 to the 6th, I think? Or 10 to the 4th? Does everyone understand how that works? Remember, the width just tells you how many characters are going to be defined or displayed. Okay? Conversion characters. What is my percent S? String. It's going to print Neptune, right? What about percent D? Double. So number of moons would be, that's a decimal, not a double. F would be for that float or double. It'd be an integer, so number 13. Orbital period, you're going to have this floating number, right? Exponential notation, we take all this number, so it'd be 4.498252 to the, what, 10th? 10 to the 10th? Okay? Or it actually, E plus 0.9. It didn't worry about this because there's nothing in there. And this is how you'd see it.
How come for the orbital period to put 4 zeros at the end? I'm missing that part of it.
Because it's a float, and they didn't define it. I don't know why it had the extra 4 zeros. Because they didn't define a width. They just said it was a float. I don't know why he did that. Because technically you should say 0.6 F if you were going to do that.
What's the default precision for a float though?
That I don't know.
I mean, it might be the 6.
It might be 6
I think
for a
it's
double.
6. I remember it's initials.
Anyway, let's see. The width is the minimum number of characters that are to be printed. So, you want to make sure you understand that. Width is the minimum number of characters to be printed. It can be printed more, but by default, output values are right aligned so that spaces are added to go on the left side. It's like accounting. Everything goes to the right. If you say 0.2, you'll have your 2 decimal spaces, and if you said 10, then you'll have a bunch of zeros to the left of it. Does that make sense? Precision just tells you how many decimal spots after. Okay. This would be 7 characters width with 4 digits over here. If I said 6, I have blank blank COOL, right? Because I gave it a character 6, everything's right justified. So I have blank blank COOL. It may look a little bad because you have these extra blanks. But if I go but dogs in 2 string in its rule, if it's bigger than that, it'll fill up those first 2 and then continue on after to the right. Does that make sense? So basically what it's saying is, right here with 6, I have 6 spaces to put cool in, but I start from over here and go C, and then when I put in the next O, it would be CO, then COO, and then COOL, until this 6 is filled up, and then I just start adding them off to the right. Does that make sense? Flags. There's supplemental formatting procedures that you can use. You can use a dash for left justification, 0 if it's numeric data for fewer characters than the width. Comma displays the numeric data to locale specific groups. Between like the 3rd digit after, to the left of each 3rd digit. Now, this can get you really screwed up here. You got to make sure that you're at least 4 before you start using this, because you don't want comma 232.10. It would look kind of funny, wouldn't it? And then in parentheses, you can display your accounting negative numbers in parentheses. Like you've seen the red one is in parentheses to display that that's a negative number. Here's where it gets kind of funky looking. I'm going to do a data format string. I'm going to do a left justified 25 character string. Then I'm going to do another one with a comma that's going to give me 13 characters to the left with .2 decimal float. Then again another one, and then again I'm going to do this with a parenthesis in a negative for the new line. Interesting, huh? And all you're doing is just formatting this one line. So you just put in office supplies actual budget remaining, and then just prints it out, and then you can get your total remaining here in commas with the 2F if it's a negative or whatever. Y'all ready? What is the name of the class that contains the absolute minimum and round methods? The integer and character classes are examples of what?
Wrapper classes.
Wrapper classes, and not something that Matthew does on the weekends. All right. Is there any questions? No?